Welcome back to another episode of the Beyond the Batter's Box podcast here at Base by Pros. I'm your host, Nick Kemper. Today we have Driveline Baseball's high performance coordinator, Mr. Zach Settles. Zach, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Well, first off, talk to me a little bit about Driveline's at the epicenter of basically baseball player development. Talk to me a little bit about how you got to Driveline and how Driveline became Driveline.
Yeah, I think we've all kind of known about Driveline since it really, I think the early days, especially a lot of like what was going on with Trevor Bauer early on. So I got first introduced to Driveline was when I first became a college pitching coach. An old friend of mine who used to be my strength coach at Cabrillo, Chase Klom, he would send me Driveline articles to read and was basically just telling me like read these blogs, get an understanding of this information. I'll be honest, a lot of it just like went over my head. I had no idea what I was reading. It just sounded like way too complex, and I was like, I'll never learn this stuff. Kind of the old school mindset of like, too hard to learn. I'm just going to go about with what I know and see how far that takes me. And I'll be honest with you, it didn't take me very far. There's definitely a lot that I had to learn. Big process of just like how to train guys, how to coach pitchers in general, and then obviously transitioning over to the strength side, understanding that side of things. So ended up doing a little bit more research, digging into it a little bit more, and the way I actually got to Driveline was through Chase. He became a hitting intern. Got pretty close with the strength staff at the time, Stephen Simmons and Daniel Comstock. So they were looking for a high-performance intern. Chase told me to apply. I didn't think I had a shot, but with luck on my side, I guess here I am, 4 years later, still working at Driveline and now a high-performance coordinator. So obviously something went right.
Right. Well, how you mentioned in there that basically a lot of stuff when you originally read a couple of Driveline's articles like went over your head. How does you guys, like you being a position of trainer, like how do you guys translate that type of stuff to the athlete when they come in and train?
Yeah, I think the real benefit is we've had so many incredibly smart people come through that have simplified a lot of it to make a meathead like myself be able to conceptualize a lot of that information, figuring out what matters and what doesn't. And then along the way, it's just being around really smart people. You're just going to end up learning that information. I think a big goal of mine was to be the dumbest person in the room, and coming to Driveline, it was not hard to find that room. But I would like to say over the years, I've been able to pick up a lot of that knowledge and been able to understand a lot of those concepts and ideas. But yeah, I think as far as articulating it to the athlete, you have to understand it on a super simplified concept, right? Like you got to be able to give it to the athlete in a way that they can understand. And I go back to like myself reading those blogs in 2015 of not being able to understand the information, being able to actually articulate that to them in a way that makes them understand it, like where I don't have to describe the physics behind what they're going through on the force plates when we're going over their assessments, but being able to like, hey, we're measuring your absolute strength. This is measuring how much force you can produce. This is telling me how strong you are. This is why being strong is important. And I think that's what's going to really register with the athlete is, all right, where am I at? Like, why does this matter? And how do I improve this? And as long as you're getting that message across, all the other stuff kind of just, it matters to us. It just doesn't matter to that much to the athlete.
Right. How many things, like when you see on social media, like there's definitely going to be the coach that like tries to appear like too smart to the athlete, right? Like they're going to try and basically say all the analytical terms, all of the scientific terms to the athlete, and like the athlete is just like overwhelmed almost. How much does that like, or how detrimental is that to athlete development? Basically understanding what you are doing and like being put in front of you, and like how can it hinder an athlete's performance or development by not understanding what they're doing?
Yeah, I think when you're trying to hit a baseball, when you're trying to hit a 95-mile-an-hour fastball, you can't be thinking about how much force am I producing, what's my ground force reaction, where are my hands? At the end of the day, you have certain checkpoints. You got to be able to, hopefully the preparation has given you the ability to self-organize into the right positions during that time. So I think it's like definitely a balance game of certain athletes don't want to know anything. certain athletes want to know a ton. And for some of those athletes, it's beneficial, and for some of them, it's not. So really figuring out what kind of process those athletes typically like to go through when they're preparing for their skill work, and then being able to make sure that like the environments that they've been in have allowed them to express those abilities in a game-like setting, so that way it's able to translate more to the field. Obviously, there's going to be like, we want to definitely focus our constraints and our cues a little bit more externally, so that way the athlete's not trying to think about internally rotating their back hip as they're trying to pitch a baseball to the mound. If you're ripping a heavy trap bar deadlift, like sure, there's certain checkpoints that you want to hit, but at the end of the day, it's push the ground away, pick the weight up, and get the weight up, stand up nice and tall. So it's like certain aspects of that, but it's also definitely a balance game, right? Like you have to have a semblance of knowledge to be able to understand what you're trying to do. And although and self-organization is incredibly important, and being able to have at least like a roadmap to get to where you're trying to self-organize to is also very important. So it's definitely a balance game, and I would say that what end of that spectrum you're going on is going to depend on the athlete.
I remember back when Bauer first introduced the Edgertronic camera to Bodie and Driveline. Like I remember reading about how he said that he would basically watch the film from the Edgertronic like over and over again, just to try and basically change. I think this is when he was learning either a slider or splitter. Basically, he was trying to get like his index finger to move like a little bit more than what it was. And I remember he would basically look at it, understand where it was, and then go back to the drawing board, i.e. the mound, and basically just try and rip pitches over and over and over again. And then in order to try and learn a changeup, he actually ended up attaching some type of electrical stimulus to his brain. And I remember his phrase was, "I'm electrifying my brain." And he didn't want to use the phrase electrocute because that means to kill. And he was trying to basically stimulate growth or motor neuron patterns in his brain to help him learn a changeup. And I remember reading this, I think I was 16, 17, and thinking to myself, there's no way this is normal. There's no way that most of the people think like this. So with that being said, what is the, proportion of athletes that come into the gym, both from, high school to big leaguer, that are like that? And then what is on the flip side of it, what is the population that are yeah, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. I'm a big dumb idiot that just loves to lift.
Yeah, it's funny. I would say, obviously this doesn't necessarily directly relate with Bauer because he was obviously a standout at UCLA, one of the top picks in the draft. I think he went right after Garrett Cole. So obviously an incredibly talented dude who was willing to think outside the box. But especially early, 2021 when I started my internship, you could definitely see there's a population of guys who were just trying to figure out how do I take that next step. Pretty strong, pretty powerful, but for whatever reason just couldn't get it to translate to the skill side. So you kind of found that those guys were the ones doing a lot more unique stuff, kind of flying a little bit closer to the sun, doing more things that I hadn't quite seen before, especially at that time. Now it's obviously spinal engine theory is very popular, and just a lot of those philosophies and ideas, and throwing different implements. But I think with the more, to me, it's always the high school, and then the pro, more skilled population kind of sticks to more of the basics and the fundamental movement skills, whereas that college to gap year indie ball guy trying to figure out how to go from 92 to 95 are the ones kind of doing a little bit more of the unique, more untraditional type stuff with their throwing, with their weight room training, basically with all of it, just to figure out what's going to create that unlock for them to be able to take that next step with their career.
Two things you mentioned: one, flying close to the sun, and two, spinal engine theory. These are going to be two topics that we touch on later, but the first one I want to touch on is basically, you mentioned flying close to the sun, and we're talking about it in reference to Driveline, and obviously you go back 5-6 years, the way Driveline trains athletes is probably more considered flying close to the sun, unorthodox, something that maybe you only do if you have no other option. Nowadays that's not the case. So what would be flying close to the sun, like in an instance where an athlete basically is like, all right, I'm looking for the best place to train. I'm going to go train at Driveline. Like, what would be considered flying close to the sun for his case? It could be of any age or any skill level.
Yeah, I mean, to me, flying close to the sun is just training at intensities that you might get burned, and I think that that's where truly good coaching comes from, and honestly, where Driveline probably gets a bad rep from, undeservedly so, is there's just athletes that come in here with maybe obtainable goals, but pretty high, pretty far out of reach to where we have to kind of put them in environments that their body just might not hold up. And honestly, that it sounds controversial, but if I have a righty that comes in here, they're 24 years old, they throw 86, and they want to play pro ball, 86 ain't going to do it anymore. Not that it ever did, but
At any level.
realistically, like, they have to throw 94 if they want to play pro ball.
Right.
So for us to get them there, like, it's going to take, we're going to end up throwing a lot of velos. We're going to end up pushing them really hard in the weight room, and not everybody's bodies are able to handle that stress. I mean, throwing a baseball is very stressful on the body, and if not managing workload properly, it can get you into some bad areas, and training really, really, really hard is not always going to feel great, and it's going to put your body in some compromised positions at times. And if everything doesn't work out great, you might get hurt, and like, that sucks. And we're definitely never trying to hurt anybody, and by no means do I think anybody should get hurt. But if your goals are that high, then you're just going to have to push it a little bit harder than maybe the other guy that's throwing 95 with ease, and that guy doesn't need to do a ton of velo work. He can focus a little bit more on pitch design to manage his workload a little bit more. And our goal is more so to maintain and keep those qualities that make him great while making a more robust athlete, where you take that gap year guy that's trying to play pro ball that throws 86, 87, it's just like, hey, like, if we're actually going to try to reach this goal, we got to push it a little bit, and pushing it always doesn't work out for everybody.
When I was growing up, one of the things that I was always told is basically like basketball and football, in terms of like the three major American sports. Like basketball and football are like genetic lottery sports. Like you have to hit the genetic lottery to basically go pro in them. And now it seems like baseball is not only heading in that direction, but is already there, right? Like we talk about probably the barrier of entry, especially in Major League Baseball, is like, what, 94, 95? And 10, 15 years ago, like it was 89, 90 maybe. How much of a genetic sport has baseball become? And is that the ceiling for humans? Have we seen that ceiling of basically humans being able to throw 105, 106? Is there a place that we can go where we see 108, 109?
I'm not quite sure. I feel like we're probably getting pretty close to the genetic potential I mean, I could be wrong. But the way I look at it is, so I graduated high school in 2010. If you threw 90 miles an hour in high school then, it was like, when's this, like, what early round is this guy getting drafted? I think two names that stick out to my mind are Robbie Erlin, who was a left-hander, Scotts Valley High School from back home. He was a lefty that was like 89 to 91, was one of the best pitchers I've ever seen. Kevin Eichhorn was another guy who was like 89, 92. They were both, I'm pretty sure they were both third-round draft picks out of high school. Phenomenal, right? Now, not ever like downplaying D3 baseball, but we have D3 baseball players who come in who you look at weigh 175 pounds and they're throwing 90, 91. And it's just like, man, if that kid played, that was 16 years ago,
Right.
like, they would have been a standout in our league. And now, like, they're just another guy, right? And I think it's funny because I find it, like, frustrating for me because it's like, man, that unathletic guy's throwing 92. Like, I threw, like, 85 on a good, like, tops, like, but it's just, things are different now. And I remember being explicitly told while I was in college, like, you can't train velocity. You either have it or you don't.
Yep.
And obviously with what Kyle's done here and how Driveline's kind of changed the landscape of training baseball and velocity, it's clearly showing that, like, there's a lot more in the tank. It's like sprinting; you just have to train it, right? If you don't train sprinting fast, you're probably not going to sprint that fast. So it's like, for me, it was like, yeah, I threw long toss. Yeah, we would do, but like the idea of doing pull downs and compression throws was like crazy to me when I was in college. Like now, that's the norm.
Yeah. I
So it's
remember
just like, and then obviously taking like the high low and balancing training economy and workload, like that. I think that's where like the evolution has been going to. So I think that it's more so like the ceiling. Yes, it's climbed. I think also the floor of our athletes has also climbed like a ton, and
Yeah.
you can see that by like the average velocity in MLB baseball and the average velocity of baseball at college, at high school. It's up through the roof, and I think that's like not trying to get too deep into this topic, but like, why are there so many elbow injuries now? And it's like because guys are throwing harder. Like Verlander talked about it, I think 2 off seasons ago, where it's like there's a double-edged sword. Like if you want to compete in Major League Baseball, you have to throw hard. Throwing hard puts a lot of stress on your body, and even the ones that do everything the right way can still get hurt. And it's the sad reality of it. But if you want to compete at the highest level, you have to train at the highest level. And like I said before, like that's you're gonna fly kind of close to the sun, and you might get burned, and that sucks.
Right. I remember when I was playing, like I would like doing pull downs when I was like in high school. Like I would get people to walk by and be like, Tommy John, UCL, whatever. And like now it's like, not only do you have to be doing that, but like you better like rip 100 too to like make it one worthwhile, and two like that's just like the norm of like how people get in the game and how people basically get to the highest levels. You have to pull some crazy numbers.
Yeah.
Kind of going back on that, I know we were talking about genetics, but then we got on the topic of development. Development now is something that it's almost like you have it or you don't. And like there's a lot of people that basically think they know what they're talking about with development. I remember when I was going through like colleges and schools, like I would always ask like, what's your development program like? And like it's kind of an ambiguous question, but in terms of like I was trying to get an answer out of people, and the amount of answers I would get, that was basically a nothing burger when it came to just a whole lot of fluff and like, yeah, we want to kind of do this that gets to this, and at the end of the day, it was just them trying to get to the end picture, which is trying to sell you on a dream of you being really good.
Right.
How prevalent is it in colleges now with a really good development program? Like, kind of what are those schools? But then, two, like, how important is it to go to school, especially now with the transfer portal and high school kids kind of getting pushed out right now? How important is it to go to school with a good development program and where that could take them? Because nowadays, like, you see 4th, 5th, 6th year guys in the transfer portal from wherever school. It could be a D3 down the road or like a D1. And you see those guys basically go to a place where they, one, can develop, and two, play out their last year and actually, you know, get really good. I remember there was a kid, I can't think of this guy's name. I bring him up all the time here, which is really sad. I can't think of his name. King was his last name. He was at Wake Forest my last year at Akron. He was like the 10th overall pick that year in the draft. And come to find out, he played at like a Division II school, like his entire college life.
Yeah.
And then obviously went to Wake Forest, you know, was 10th overall pick in the draft. I think he's somewhere in either high minor league baseball or in the major leagues by now. But how important was development from him, or like for him, to clearly get to the level that he's at now? And how important is development from like a general athlete perspective, somebody who's looking to go to college but isn't necessarily a top tier kid?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like speaking about which colleges are developing guys the best, it's hard for me to say just because it's been so long since I've been a part of that landscape and being away from it for so long. But like, I think like obviously with schools like Wake Forest, with their labs, their coaching staff, everything that they do. Vanderbilt's also another really incredible school that's really invested in their player development and really brought in like a lot of different minded people to kind of come in. A lot of analytics staff. I think LSU does a phenomenal job with their development of guys, and obviously you can see with how those schools are just pushing guys into the draft who are obviously very talented and move through the rankings very quickly. But yeah, I mean, I think it's huge, and it's one of those things of like, you know, especially walking around here, but you walk around any of those college campuses or see their practices, it's like, man, if I had this when I played, like, I wonder what could have happened. And it's just like, it's just so massive just to see the focus on actually raising guys' ceilings, which wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago, right? It was kind of like what I was saying as far as you are who you are, and if things click and you end up somehow being put in the right environment, that's great. But now there's just so much more research and knowledge, and the idea of development is so prevalent that like you just have to either adapt to it and add it to your program, or you're just going to fall behind. And like that's why schools like LSU and Texas and Arkansas and Wake Forest and Florida State, they get all the transfers because guys know their pedigree and they know that guys go there and they take very athletic guys who just can't transfer that skill set to the field, and they develop incredibly good baseball players. So yeah, I would say development is absolutely massive, and it's just a concept that for whatever reason took a while for us to get to, but we're here now, and guys are amazing. So it's a lot of fun to watch.
You mentioned a lot of the big schools, like Texas, LSU, Arkansas. All those schools have massive amounts of resources. Like I think I just saw on Twitter a few months ago, like Florida State put in a new pitching lab with you guys that probably costed a ton of money. Like, how do the smaller schools, both low level, like D1s, and then also D2, D3 JUCOs, like how do they get? I don't want to say resources because at the end of the day, like they're just not going to be able to afford it. But how do they compete in the arms race, if you will, with the development, and how do they get the necessary tools needed to develop players?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the reason why we all love baseball, right? Is you can have the guys that you could have the labs, you can have all the money, you can have whatever, but it's whatever happens on the diamond, right? So it's like for those smaller schools, still investing in their development, it's just going to look a little differently, right? Like getting plyo balls, making sure that you're developing your education to understand exactly how your practice format should go. Are you spending the fall and making guys play super early, or are you actually just putting them periodizing their fall to create some form of adaptation and raise their ceiling, so that way when it comes time to play during the season, they're the best baseball players they can be. And if guys are developing and getting better, you're going to find a lot less of them leave the school. So it's just like you hear about guys getting to the college campus and their coaches are telling them, whatever you were doing at whatever facility before, you're not doing that anymore. We're running a ton. You're throwing your bullpens. We're not managing your training economy. Those guys get ran into the ground, and they're like, F this, I'm out of here. I'm going to go to a school that's going to allow me to develop. So I think, like, obviously the landscape of college baseball is so weird. Just COVID, transfer portal, NIL, it's all just so different, and it's got its benefits, but it's also got its flaws. But yeah, I mean, for those smaller schools to kind of hang tight and be able to compete, it's just really emphasizing what they can do and not needing to get the lab and all that stuff. Obviously that's going to help, but really just focusing on well-structured practices that actually allow the players to develop and be put into the environments to raise their ceilings, rather than forcing them to almost be a finished product right when they get to campus and as they go through the fall.
But you mentioned the lab. How important is the lab? Like, obviously there's a lot of biomechanics there. I know it's not your specialty, but like what can you like talk about when it comes to the importance of biomechanics, like how you read that, and then how you tell a player that? Because a lot of it is going to be jargon that they're not familiar with, and some of them, they can't even conceptualize it. So how do you relay, and this is kind of touching on like the similar, talking point that I asked you earlier, but like how do you use biomechanics in baseball, and how does it basically, like what's the fine line between too far and too little? Because old heads nowadays get so mad when they see like an iPad in the dugout, right? So obviously biomechanics with a multi-$1,000 lab probably going to be beyond the iPad point. So like how do you basically toe that gray area of getting information that's valuable to the athlete and then having the athlete actually conceptualize it and put it into good use?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, like having a lab is going to be the best, right? Like having a lab, and to me, what it really does is it confirms a lot of what you're seeing, right? Or there's a lot of times, like I always joke, like my eye Soto sucks, and like my eyes probably do suck. But at the end of the day, like what those old school coaches are seeing is probably somewhat accurate. It's just now you have the data to back it up, show to the athlete, get that buy-in. and that's obviously going to be very crucial. And then there's a lot that we don't see that the biomechanical reports can show us, as far as like what type of positions you're getting hip shoulder separation, where's your elbow, like as far as in space, what kind of elbow flexion are you getting, what's your lead leg block doing, how is it extending through your delivery, everything like that. So it's all concepts that we talked about, like I guess in the old school ways, as far as being able to like actually create a good lead leg block, being able to drive off the back leg, use the lower half really well. What that all means, everybody's got their differential opinions on that. But at the end of the day, like, it's just a lot of times it's either confirming what their coaches are seeing, or it's giving them a different perspective of what to actually look at and what to train. And then for us, it's just a really good way to measure it and see how we're improving it, right? It's really hard to see different joint angles at different positions with certain cameras. So having like the Edgertronic cameras, having the mocap reports, and being able to go through the biomechanical analysis of their delivery and their mechanics, it just allows us to not guess, but actually address what's going on.
How important is this in youth sports? Because we had Devin Morgan on, who's obviously like with you guys. We had him on last week, and basically, like, we talked a lot about youth sports and like youth baseball in general. We didn't really touch on like any of the like actual development side. I mean, a little bit of it, but not anything like this today. Like, how does this, if at all, play a role in youth sports? I know obviously you guys have people fly from around the country to come basically train here, of all ages. But like, how important is it in youth sports, and like how does it get used properly? Because I think a lot of parents will basically see like flash technology, whatever, and they're like, oh, I have to have that. And like ultimately it can sometimes result in like their kids getting burnt out, or like their kid doesn't even really want to do that in the first place. It's really just parent driven. So how does it play in youth sports, and like how do you guys show that like what you guys are doing is like good for youth sports, one, but then two, you guys don't overwhelm the kid? Because I know you guys place a huge emphasis on making stuff fun too. Like, you guys play a ton of games. You guys are a big fan of holistic development. So how do you guys basically combine the biomechanics lab and everything else you do with the actual fun of youth sports?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to say that like the mocap reports and doing all that for the younger population, it's cool, it's beneficial. It's really not going to truly become important until after the kids have hit puberty and they're actually filling into their bodies. But I still think for us, it's a really good way to analyze and collect data and see how people develop. I think Devin's a great example of, as far as his son Danny, who's been training with us since I think he was 9 years old, right, and has come through our system. So having that like longitudinal, like that data of like from 9 to I think he's 16 or 17 now, yeah, like that's massive, right? And so being able to take those, I think success does leave clues, as far as just like, all right, this is what really good baseball players do. Let's design the environments to help try to create those positions that these elite athletes are going through. But at the end of the day, like, if like, especially with our long-term athletic development crew, like, keep it fun, keep it engaging, allow them to express their athleticism and figure out different ways to move their bodies, and expose them to as many different problems as possible to increase their movement literacy, so that way they become just better problem solvers. And using the mocap reports to see how that problem solving is going is a really good way to check in on it. But by no means is it the end all be all for that population, just because so much is going to change as they go through puberty and as they go through high school and as they get older, that it's more so engaging and keeping it fun. But yeah, I mean, I would like my son, like, I don't care if he does a mocap report until he's in high school. Like, right. I don't think it's going to necessarily bring a ton of value. It'll be cool to look at, and it'll be fun, and it appeases a lot of the parents. But yeah, to me, it's maybe even controversial to say, but yeah, I don't see a ton of value in it for the younger population.
For sure. Yeah, we had Patrick Wisdom on since like a couple weeks ago now, and obviously he's a big leaguer now, and he said that he went to basically one camp in high school. It was the school that he went to, St. Mary's, and basically like he was first round pick. And obviously then there's the flip side of it, and this is kind of what I'm going to ask you here in a sec, is basically the kids that go, I don't want to say like overly overly stimulated, I guess, with baseball development. But they basically, from a young age, their parents are like, hey, we're going to do this camp and this camp, and we're going to overload you year round and not play any other sport because we have to basically get ahead. How important is that? I know we talked about genetics and development now, like kind of it's like a mesh of the two. How important is basically starting young, specializing, if you will? I know that's a huge topic of controversy right now. How important is that to basically having, little Jimmy, your son, get to the big leagues or even higher level baseball compared to the kid who basically plays three sports year round and then ends up choosing baseball in college, focuses on it, and then still gets drafted? Like, what is the line? Is there a line? Like, how do you decipher that? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I was try not to live with too many regrets, but I'll definitely say like a big regret of mine was not playing football in high school. And obviously, I think it saved a lot of brain cells by not playing football. So,
Yeah.
shout out to that. But at the same time, like I didn't get introduced to the weight room until my freshman year of college, just because I specialized in baseball and I played basketball in high school, right? And I think basketball was incredibly invaluable for me. So it's like to answer your question, I think kids should play as many sports as possible until they have to specialize, until you're forced to. Like I think the idea of being like a PO in high school is kind of whack. I think that really good athletes are going to be really good athletes, and you can always. I don't want to say you can always learn how to pitch, but you can kind of always learn how to pitch, and that's I played D2 college baseball as a pitcher. Like it's one of those things that I specialized super early on. I spent my summers playing baseball. I spent my fall playing baseball. I spent my springs playing baseball. But basically, the only time I didn't was the winters when I was playing basketball. And I just think that to really expose these kids to as much as possible, it's allowing them to play as many sports as possible. And to me, it was like the really good baseball players are the ones that are really good at a wide variety of different things. Like, obviously, there's going to be the guys who specialize in baseball, were really good at baseball, and then ended up playing Major League Baseball. That's awesome. However, like you look at a guy like Mookie Betts, like you watch him bowl, he'll probably bowl 300. If you watch him play basketball, it's just like, man, is this guy? If he was any taller, he'd probably be a professional basketball player. Like it's one of those things as far as, and he's probably one of the best problem solvers on the planet. And you run into like a lot of guys like that. Like a lot of our very good baseball players are just really good athletes. And it's funny because I joke around about it, but like we throw football routes as part of our dynamic warm-up. You threw some pretty good balls on the turf. And it's one of those things if you can kind of tell who was good, who's going to be a good athlete, and who's going to be a good mover on the mound by how they run their routes and catch the football. Like our less athletic kids are probably the ones that are struggling on the skill side. And so it's being able to have a very diverse movement library is incredibly important. And the best way that you're going to learn that is by playing a wide variety of sports and being put in all sorts of different situations.
I'm glad you mentioned basically being a PO in high school is kind of whack because I've always thought that too. Especially like, I mean, some of these kids are 15 at POs, and it's like, dude, you
Yeah.
feel like puberty there for some kids. And I remember Clayton Thompson, who's with the Los Angeles Dodgers, and you guys basically always talks about like pitchers on their off day, or not on their off day, but on their light day, should always throw like they're a shortstop. And I think that kind of touched on the athleticism point because so many times as pitchers we get into the habit, or not really like the habit, but just like the ingrained movement pattern of moving one way and one way only. And we almost forget how to move athletically because we've just been ingrained in that pattern for so long.
Yeah.
Kind of like throwing from a shortstop position or being Derek Jeter and like throwing deep in the hole, that kind of helps bring that athletic movement back. What does that look like from like a hitting perspective? Like, can that be changed? Because obviously hitting, like you can hit for one way for years and years and years, and you will like almost forget the other athletic patterns that you've learned as well. Like, is there a way to do that for the hitting side? Is there a way to basically help develop hitters from another athletic standpoint? Obviously, they're playing a position; they're gonna be more athletic than pitchers anyway. But is there a way to do that hitting?
Yeah, I mean, I think the drills, right? The drills themselves kind of take care of that, along with obviously training different ways outside of the cage is going to be very valuable for that. But it's not like our hitters just go in there and practice their game swings with one certain stance the entire times. And like I've even seen guys who end up developing an entirely different stance because they like certain feels from certain drills that help them get into certain positions. But it was an O-chart comment I saw that was like somebody was like, "Man, this drill is really hard. I'm having a hard time getting it like actually executing." And it was like, "Sounds like it's a really good drill for you." And I think that like, and I probably butchered his quote, and it didn't sound as necessarily intelligent as I originally thought it was going to, but that was like honestly a concept that really stuck with me as far as like, oh, this drill's really hard. Yeah, it's actually probably really good for you. And being exposed to really hard training environments, it's just going to make the game easier. And like I think that's a concept that's now is like fairly common sense, but at the same time, it took a while for us to get to this spot. And guys just don't want to struggle. They want to hit off the mini hack. They want to have it go right down the middle. They want to crush pull side home runs. And obviously, yes, our assessment is a lot of mini hack right down the middle. Get your A swing off. Let's see what your ceiling looks like. But our training environments are incredibly hard. And like you can see that. You come in the weight room, you ask a hitter how it went, and they look like they're ready to walk out the building because they're just questioning their entire life because they just hit mixed pitch off the eye pitch, and they're like, yeah, I maybe made contact 3 times. And then like they do that over and over and over again, and all of a sudden it's like they come in a little bit more positive, or they go and start playing and they're like, oh, I can hit this baseball really easy because it's like I'm not facing the nastiest slider I've ever faced. I'm facing this 17-year-old that throws a not great slider and an 87-mile-an-hour fastball, and they've been exposed to way harder in the environments that they were training under, and then all of a sudden they get out there and they're a lot more athletic, a lot more free, and they're able to express their ability a lot easier. So definitely went on a tangent there, but like as far as the environments go, I think the environments should be hard, and they should put you in really uncomfortable positions that end up feeling natural once you start going through them and you start kind of getting the idea of being comfortable, being uncomfortable.
I'm glad you brought up the challenging environments part because I think that's what a lot of people don't see necessarily from like social media at Driveline is basically they see everybody getting better, everybody developing, but the path that it takes to get there is oftentimes like mired in just a whole bunch of failure. And I remember like the summer after my freshman year of college, I was down in Arizona at Driveline, and I was training with, among other guys, Chris Esposito, who ended up going to Nebraska Omaha, and he's one of my friends to this day. But I'll never forget this. We're driving home from a training session, and he had one of these days that you talk about with the eye pitch. And basically, I remember like we get in the car, and he had hit like maybe 2 balls that day. And he gets in the car, and he's like death gripping the steering wheel and not talking at all. And there's 2 other guys in the back, and all of us are like, because we're all going back to the same house, so it's like this is gonna be awkward. This is what the conversation will be like the rest of the day. And I remember somebody said like, Chris, you good? And he just starts like punching the shit out of his steering wheel, and he was like, I effing hate this game, F baseball, whatever. And I remember after that, it was just like silence the entire way home. We get home and he was done, and then the very next year he was conference player of the year at a D1 school. And like that's kind of like what you talk about with the amount of failure that you go through in the challenging environment, because it is really hard. Like you're hitting balls out of a machine where you can't see hand delivery, 100 miles an hour with a 92-mile-an-hour slider, and you're probably never even going to see that up until you get to the big leagues anyway. But it helps train basically harder environments to then when you get in game, it's like, wow, this is easy. And I think a lot of people kind of like what you talk about, they miss the point of making practice hard so that games are easy. A lot of people, I think, do the other way around. They make practice easy so games are hard. And I think that is like a huge avenue too, or not a huge avenue, but a huge kind of roadblock in development too, is people forget like practice should be really hard because the game should be easier. And I think, getting to that point is going to help everybody. How does, schools getting back to the talk about the schools, like how do they make practice hard specifically, right? Like we've talked a lot about the idea of making practice hard, but how do you make practice hard as a school?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a wide variety of ways, and I think you're starting to see it with how teams are starting to use batting practice. Hartnell College, which is a junior college in Salinas, California, I loved what they were doing with their batting practice, where they had a guy throwing BP, and then they had some form of it was like a hack attack or an eye pitch behind them, And it was basically coach behind raises his hand, other coach goes to throw. They have some form of signal, and you don't know which one's coming. It could be a nasty slider coming from the pitching machine, or it could be a fastball with a little zip coming from the coach, and you're having to make a split decision, right? Like, that's actually going to replicate what's going to go on in a game. I think the Padres were doing it a couple years ago where they were using some form of eye pitch or pitching machine from very close to replicate actual true game velocity. And, it's not going to make BP as fun. Like, if you're a fan and you're trying to go catch a home run in the stands, like, you're going to get a lot less of those. But we're actually replicating what the game environment's going to be like, honestly, maybe even a little bit more challenging. And it's just going to get the athletes a lot more prepared. I know with, like, basketball, right? Like, basketball is a great example of the way to get better is shorten the shot clock. Now you're going to have to get ready to move faster. Shorten the court. So now you're going to have to get back and forth a lot faster. Take the hands out of it. Start from behind. Like, there's different constraints to do where it's just kind of like, I have to react. I have to go make a play. It's really hard, but that's actually going to create a little bit more transfer over to the field rather than I'm going to hit you a fungo. We're going to hit a fungo to your left. We're going to hit a fungo to your right. And it's like, that's great. That looks pretty, right? Any outies. Hey, like, left field, line, go to 2. Like, that's great, right? It's going to look good. Coaches love it. It looks very appeasing to the crowd. However, is it actually preparing you for the game? And that's what really matters. So it's one of those things of, like, figuring out what can you actually execute, right? You can't make practice so difficult that nobody ever succeeds, because that's going to demoralize your players. It's going to create a little bit more doubt in your ability to coach them. And then also, they're just not going to create the gains that you're looking for. So it's really on the coaches. It's really on the coaches to create the environment that's challenging yet possible. And then as, like, that development keeps getting better, keep making those environments just a little bit more challenging, just to have those athletes grasping to try to get to that level.
You brought up multiple sports there, kind of going on to, like, the future Driveline. I remember when I was there, you guys kind of talked about, like, potentially trying to branch off into multiple sports. Is that something that is on the horizon soon for Driveline? Is basically trying to develop multiple sports?
I'd like it to be for at least the high performance side, right? Because at the end of the day, everybody always likes to talk about, like, sports specific training. The best sports specific training for a baseball player is, like, the best upper body exercise for throwing a baseball is to go throw a baseball. The best ability to rotate and swing the bat is to go rotate and swing the bat. But at the end of the day, it's on us to create those general physical qualities that, yes, build capacity in the areas that need to be prepared, in the tissues that need to be prepared for the sport. That is incredibly important. However, you can attack that avenue for a wide variety of different sports, especially rotational sports like tennis, hockey, baseball, sports where you're really having to rotate, golf. Like, those are really a lot of the same areas to train, right? You increase your ability to produce force. You increase the rate of your ability to produce, how fast you can produce that force. And then also, while training the skill side, you're going to see a lot of carryover. As far as the overall direction, yeah, I'd like to see the high performance side get into basketball, get into football, get into soccer, get into a wide variety of different sports, and being able to analyze a lot of that. As far as our motion capture stuff goes, it's not really my avenue, so I'm not quite sure, but I do know that we're definitely interested in it. Like, Bryce Kreider, who's the high performance coordinator in Florida, throws the javelin, is looking to compete for the Olympics. And I know that he's motion captured a lot of that stuff, right? And at the end of the day, like, sure, there's definitely some technique differences between throwing a javelin and throwing a baseball. But at the end of the day, like, throwing is throwing. There's still a lot of the same positions that you can get into. I know that we've analyzed, like, tennis swing, like tennis serves and volleyball spikes and stuff like that. So there's definitely an avenue for it. Obviously, we're gonna focus on baseball. We are Driveline Baseball, but at the same time, getting into other sports, I never think it's a bad idea.
Yeah, Bryce. I mean, obviously, Bryce and I've known each other for a while. Like, he talks about, one, the parallels between javelin and baseball are similar. But then, two, he's also a big proponent of spinal engine theory, which we kind of talked about a little bit earlier on in the podcast. Like, how does that, and for those who don't know, like, in short, basically spinal engine theory is just saying that the majority of the energy comes from the spine. and like how you move throughout the spine is basically what channels that energy. How does that fit into athletic development? Him and Clayton are both doing a whole lot of back bridging right now, and back bridging is something that's become very popular in the past couple of years. Um, can you talk about a little bit about that and like what you know about that and how it relates to both baseball and sports?
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely always leave it to them to discuss it in a little bit more detail, just because they are so knowledgeable into that, into spinal engine theory and just different ways to move the body. But I think it's just incredibly important to know how to move your body, right? Like when I was getting into strength and conditioning when I got into college, and then throughout my training and as I became a strength coach and a trainer. We always preach like have a neutral posture, have neutral posture, have neutral posture. And like, yes, there are obviously certain movements where that's important. You got to be able to brace. You don't want too much spinal flexion or extension throughout when under heavy loads, as long as you're not, especially if you're not ramped up for it, right? But being able to go through extreme extension and flexion, lateral flexion, certain movements like that is incredibly important, because especially that way you have more access and more solutions if you run into those certain problems when you're trying to develop your skill set. But then also being exposed to those ranges allows your body to handle being exposed to those ranges when it does go through those positions at high velocities during your sport. So for me, it's really important to understand how to have a neutral posture, how to resist extension, how to resist flexion, but also go into flexion, go into extension, go into lateral flexion, being able to rotate at will, right? Like it's all of it that you should be able to do. And the more that you can develop that as an athlete, the more movement solutions you're going to have.
Sure. Kind of bad transition, but kind of wrapping up here. Couple things. One, obviously you work with higher level athletes, Major League Baseball players specifically. You talked about it a little bit to me in last summer. There was a couple conversations or a couple moments in your life where basically a big leaguer would call you. It'd be like 11 o'clock at night, and you'd have to pick up the phone. Talk to me about like how you balance the life on the job, outside of the job. Obviously, you have a family, wife and kid, and a dog, Benny. How do you balance? Yeah, how do you balance that with the demands of having to take a phone call at 10, 11 o'clock at night?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be completely honest. I grew up obsessed with sports, football, basketball, baseball. Grew up a big A's fan, Warriors fan, Niners fans. Had to get that in there. However, like, so to me it is basically a 24-hour job, and it's like, obviously, if you need to figure out a variation change for an exercise at 11 p.m., like, one, what are you doing lifting at 11 p.m., and like, two, like, this can't wait till tomorrow. At the same time, though, like, especially with our higher level guys, like, they're gonna get done at crazy times, and for me to be able to be a part of their journey and to be a part of their process, it's like an honor to me. I think it's a huge compliment that they would put that trust in me as far as their careers go. And if they're willing to do that, then I have to be willing to answer that phone call at 11 p.m. because, it's to them, it's their life. So if it's not my life, then they don't want me to be a part of it, or they shouldn't, right? So I think balancing it is obviously very important. Having that work-life balance is incredibly important. Making time, like, the most important time for me is being able to hang out with my son. Whether it's in the morning when we're eating breakfast together, whether it's doing bath time and doing his bedtime routine, like, by far, number one priority is always going to be him. But at the same time, like, these athletes, they put a lot of trust into me and their careers. So I have to be able to return the favor and answer those phone calls, or if they have a bad outing and they need to vent and talk about it, like, I got to be there. Like, that's just part of the responsibility. I'm done playing. My sleep isn't nowhere near as important. My body's nowhere near as important as it used to be as performance goes. So it's, at the end of the day, like, yeah, to be a part of their journey is an honor, and I have to make sure I'm ready to go and being able to be as much of a resource for them as possible.
For sure. For sure. You mentioned your son. I know you're a big basketball fan. Would you rather have your son play basketball or baseball?
I mean, it really depends on what level we're talking about, right? Like, his mom, I think, is 5'6". I'm 5'11". Basketball, there's really only so much of a ceiling that he's going to have unless there's, like, some crazy height that he grows to. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I just want him to do whatever he actually enjoys doing. Baseball will be fun. Basketball will be fun. I hope to get him in dance, gymnastics, jiu-jitsu. Like, there's a wide variety of different things that I want him to be able to enjoy. My father-in-law wants him to ride horses, and it's like if he enjoys doing that, that's great. But yeah, I mean, as far as choosing between basketball and baseball, probably baseball, just because I think, like, sure, he could go further with it, but yeah.
Right, for sure. Yeah, parents, take notes. Let your kid do a wide variety of things.
Oh, yeah.
Lastly here, actually, two things. One, I ask everybody this. Working in sports, you obviously find some scenarios or situations that you find yourself in that are basically deemed not normal. Do you have a crazy, like, one-off situation that was either, like, extremely funny or, like, one of those moments where you kind of, like, look to the guy next to you and you're like, dude, nobody's going to believe that this happened?
Probably, but they're probably I probably purposely block them out of my mind. I mean, obviously, dealing with the population that we're constantly dealing with, there's going to be some people who aren't necessarily too accustomed to the weight room, very uncomfortable, that do incredibly dumb things in the weight room. Definitely don't want to put anybody on blast, but I would even say recently we've seen some things that happen where it's just like, all right, like, what possibly went through your mind to think that was the solution to that problem? But yeah, I would say, especially with we're working with the younger population, you see a lot of very interesting things. I will say, if I was in this environment when I was 15, I would have been one of those guys as well, though. So it's all learning.
Do you have, like, one specific scenario? Like, for instance, like, Terry Phillips, when he was on, he said that WAP, that song by Nicki Minaj, or Cardi B, I think, was playing while Otani was in the building, like, and he was working on him, like, at the moment, and he was like, this is crazy that this whole thing is happening.
Yeah.
Like, Brent Deliberate said, like, he, like, jumped out of a window with Tim Lincecum at a house party one night. Like, is there something, obviously, like, don't name names if it's going to be bad, but, like, is there one scenario that you can think of that was just, like, overly funny or overly, like, crazy?
No, probably not. I mean, honestly, like, I would say, as far as, like, what's crazy is just who I've been able to be around, just living this life and being in this game. If you saw what I was doing when I was like 24, 25 years old, to think at 34 I'd be a high performance coordinator and had the pleasure to be around Shohei a few years ago and rub shoulders with some of the people I've had the benefit of rubbing shoulders with. I got to play with Bryce Harper when I was growing up, and that was obviously very cool and definitely let me know that I wasn't as good as I thought I was after watching the way that he went about his business, watching him throw a long toss and seeing the way how fast he could swing the bat and just everything about that. But yeah, I would just say being able to be around who I've been able to be around has been pretty surreal and pretty exciting, and definitely stoked about that, and definitely still some good stuff to come. So
For sure. Yeah, I remember, I think I read a story about Bryce Harper being 6'1", 190 pounds at 12 years old. And that kind of puts in perspective of how freakishly, like, athletic some of those guys are at that age.
Yeah. I mean, watching him throw a long toss, I was I think 15 or 16. I think he was 14 or 15 at the time. We were playing for, at the time it was called Cal Club Baseball, and he was throwing long toss with our second baseman. Our second baseman would throw him the ball. Bryce would have to go set his hat down to remind him where he was. He would go run and get the ball, backpedal back to where he was actually at throwing, and then throw it. And at a certain point, we're like, do we need to have a middle guy? Like, do we need to have a cutoff man for him? Like, this is getting ridiculous. And because I remember my high school coach telling me, like, oh, I played with A-Rod. He would throw from yellow pole to yellow pole on a line. And I was like, man, like, you're probably over-exaggerating. And then I watched Bryce do it, and it was just like, okay, like, that's a real thing. And obviously, like, a year or two later, he ended up going 1-1 overall, winning the Golden Spikes Award at a JUCO, and it was just like, yeah, okay, like, that, he was special. So it was cool to kind of see that go to fruition. And I guess a funny story is he always wears 34, especially when he first came up with the Nats and growing up. I always wore 34. So he came to our team as kind of like a ringer, and he wanted number 34, and my coach got mad at me because I wouldn't give it to him. So my coach was just like, yeah, that was probably, I guess, the funny story is Bryce was ready to walk away, and we ended up making him wear 42, which obviously has its things, but yeah, he was not too thrilled with me for not giving up 34.
That's a crazy. I think like that could go down as like one of your like lore moments of like you took Bryce Harper's number at one point in life. Like that's a
In my fairness, it was my number.
right. But like
Yeah, I'm not giving that up for anybody.
like you weren't giving that up at all. Okay.
No.
Last question. All sports here. Top three athletes of all time.
Top three what?
Athletes of all time.
Ooh, Shohei Ohtani.
Yep.
Definitely incredible freak athlete. I mean, Bo Jackson, right? You have to have Bo Jackson in that category. Third, probably Michael Vick, right? Like with how fast he was, his ability to change direction. I mean, it sucks not to put somebody like Barry Sanders on that list. I mean, even Christian McCaffrey, which I know is obviously a little biasness towards the 49ers, but yeah, I mean, I would have to say Shohei, Bo Jackson, and then Michael Vick.
Okay. For sure. Yes. Bo Jackson's I think is the most common answer that we've gotten, but we've gotten some crazy ones for sure that are out there. But
Which ones would you say were the crazy ones?
well, Devin said 3 guys last week, or that I don't even like, remember. 2 of them were like local legends. I don't even remember the names, which I'm sorry, like not to be offensive at all, but like I don't remember these guys' names, and probably most of yours don't even know who these guys are. But yeah, he said a few guys that both Terry and I were like, what? Like that's it. But I think it was more so like biases. But no, Bo Jackson's probably one of the most common answers that we get. But I surprisingly, haven't heard a lot of LeBron. I don't think I've heard LeBron at all, actually.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually probably fair. I feel kind of, maybe it's my Warriors biasness of trying to block out playing him in the finals 4 years in a row. But, I mean, at one point he was the fastest guy in the NBA, potentially one of the strongest, potentially jumped the highest. Like, he's definitely in that category. I probably should have put him over Michael Vick, but I just think about Michael Vick growing up, watching him run around and how fast he was, how far he could throw the football. It was just like, if we're just talking pure athleticism,
For sure.
he was special.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that concludes the episode today. Zach Settles, thank you very much for coming on. If you have socials or anything that you want to plug, go ahead and do them now.
Okay. Yeah, Settles _SP for Instagram, and then Zach Settles 34 for Twitter. We're starting to get popping on there, so
Ooh,
definitely check it out, follow, and if you guys have any content that you guys want, just DM me, let me know, and I'll try to get it going.
Man of the people right there. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for tuning in to the Beyond the Batter's Box podcast. We will see you next week.